Anomalous acute and subacute field effects on human biological tissues. Several years ago, 3 previous fit and active individuals experienced an anomalous aerospace-related event. Within 72 hours they suffered medical signs and symptoms. These included almost immediate erythema, heat and redness, overexposed skin, and varying degrees of the following as a function of their body surface exposure times: fever, pain, headaches, numbness and parasthesiae, malaise, diarrhea, loss of hair and alopecia, skin eruptions/boils, cardiac palpitations, beginnings of what were to become chronic headaches and symptoms of insomnia and other sleep and dream disturbances, moderate to occasional severe anxiety and insomnia. 2 of the persons also experienced photophobia, extreme sensitivity to light, dry and scratchy stinging eyes, and extreme inflamed bloodshot sclera, whites of the eyes, with soft tissue swelling of the eyelids. 1 of the 3 experienced moderate blood dyscrasia and signs of radiation illness, and over several years developed signs of malignant transformations. Extensive, but controversial investigations revealed the 3 had been subjected to an accidental exposure in the near field to a broadband ultra-high radio frequency mixed radiation of RF, radio frequency, NEM, non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation, and microwave energies, including nonspecific and unmeasured induced ionizing effects, probably mixed UVA, UVB and UVC, ultraviolet A, B, C, centered at about 785 MHz. These 3 persons were Intini engineers subjected to an anomalous accident. An extensive review of the medical literature and a compilation of a database has revealed an additional relevant but less dramatic 42 cases from the peer-reviewed medical literature, and an additional unpublished similar 300 cases, primarily when fields were measured or emitters were known of mixed exposures of from 1-10 GHz at power densities of above 100 mW/cm2. Summary. This paper relates, summarizes, and analyzes evidence of unintended injury to human observers by anomalous advanced aerospace systems. Additionally, an argument is made that the subsequent work can inform, for example, reverse engineer, through clinical diagnoses, certain physical characteristics of possible future advanced aerospace systems from unknown provenance that may be a threat to United States interests. The evidence discussed includes scientific material that has been peer-reviewed, contained in recently declassified government documents, and early emergent clinical medical analyses also underway in companion research studies. Based on historical cases, humans have been found to have been injured from exposures to anomalous vehicles, especially airborne, and when in relatively close proximity. The primary mechanisms of injury are related to electromagnetic radiation field effects, EMR field effects. The biophysical characteristics of the injuries are well understood. The energy-related propulsion systems are not well understood. The potential deployment of systems is thus important to understand. Sufficient incidents/accidents have been accurately reported, and medical data acquired, as to support a hypothesis that some advanced systems are already deployed, and opaque to full U.S. understanding. Amongst the most important pathophysiological effects are, heating and burn injuries, ionizing and non-ionizing thermally induced. Neurological effects. Cognitive, central nervous system. Neuromuscular, central and autonomic nervous systems. Sensory, peripheral nervous system. Neuropsychiatric, neuroendocrine. Auditory, cranial nerves 7 and 8 communication and disabling effects. Noise and central neurocognitive. Analysis of clinical diagnostic codes together with environmental conditions observed during anomalous events are clustered in meaningful ways. The medical analyses, while not requiring the invention of an alternative biophysics, do indicate the use of, to us, unconventional and advanced energy systems. Chapter 1, Definition of topic and domain of this study. The objective of the overall program for which this paper has been prepared is to understand the physics and the engineering of advanced aerospace weapon system applications, into the future, for example, from now through the year 2050. This study addresses the clinical medical signs and symptoms and biophysics of injury known and expected from unintended exposure to anomalous systems. A. What is addressed in this review? Advanced aerospace technologies, as with current technologies, often involve exposure of humans to exceptionally strong, and in the future to likely exotic, fields. This review is meant to cover the clinical medical injurious effects, including harmful psychiatric, psychological effects on the human organism that may be induced. Specifically, we are interested both in the more narrow scope of certain near-field heating and burn effects on biological tissues and also systemic or internal medical, neurological, psychiatric injury or sequelae, usually modulated by neural tissue. Near field is a term we intentionally leave as subjective. That is, we include effects of possible exposures that are within sight of the injured, and which are acute, within hours, or subacute, but not longer chronic effects. Our working distance from the putative emitter is tens of meters, and injury times are less than 10 minutes. We thus focus on the acute and subacute high-level, not chronic low-level exposures and effects. The most important bandwidth of interest is the range with tissue effects on humans, from about 300 kHz to 300 GHz, that is, from about 1 km to 1 mm wavelength. In particular, we note that many of the effects on tissues, as currently with all environmental exposures of non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation, NEMR, toxic effluents, and noise. Thermal effects, are initially incorrectly adduced to be subclinical until chronic effects of low-level effects and/or accumulative doses are recognized. We will be particularly cognizant to not miss this subtlety in determining harm to persons in the near field of possible advanced aerospace systems. We will not, except by reference, discuss ionizing radiation tissue effects, unless they are adduced to be mixed field, for example the Cash-Landrum case, vide infra. Therefore, since the potential deployment of advanced weapons technology is subsumed under this topic, of interest are not only side effects associated with possible lift/propulsion field mechanisms of advanced craft architectures, but also effects from advanced weapon systems as well. These include but are not limited to beam weapons, and active denial systems, ADS, including high-powered microwaves, HPM. B. What is not addressed in this review? We are aware of claims that some new and emergent systems may be intended to cause harm, and thus even be an intended weapon system. We make no attempt herein to validate any claims. There is ample precedent in U.S. history for utilizing a separate analytic framework for verification and compliance issues, as in the lag in our recognizing former Soviet Union and Chinese systems utilizing infrasonic, laser blinding, and NEMR weapons that went unappreciated by our intelligence agencies for 2 decades. Historically, the IC, intelligence community, adduces verification first, claims of injury secondly, and compliance after lengthy state-sponsored discursive. We will not make that mistake. Beyond this, from a sociological perspective, expansion of this theme may also include the effects on humans en masse, namely inducement of hysteria, alteration or solidification of belief systems, alteration/destruction of social structures, group dynamics, etc., the analyses of which would require expertise in a great number of fields including sociology, anthropology, psychology, etc. This review will not critically evaluate epidemiological infectious disease or low-level electromagnetic radiation, RF aspects of certain exposures, except in passing. We will not address psychophysics, paranormal, explicit pre-existing or chronic psychiatric, or abnormal psychological effects from exposures. However, in the early draft of IC Code Project in Appendix C, psychiatric diagnostic codes when made by a qualified physician, and medical sequelae from perceived abductions are included for completeness. Chapter 2, Background, What is thought to cause harm? It is well understood that long-term exposure to even chronic low-strength as well as acute high-strength electromagnetic fields, ionizing radiation, intense lasers, etc., can have harmful effects on human physiology. Terms defined vide infra, it is also known that EMR mechanisms can disrupt physiological and psychological functioning on a temporary basis. Emerging data support that some of the chronic low-level effects alter the ability of cells to function properly due to epigenetic effects, damage to the DNA, RNA protein regulatory pathways, independent of chromosome disruption, and simultaneously alter the metabolism of dividing cells of, especially, the neuroimmune system. The same holds true for exposure to toxic chemical, biological, or nuclear materials. Setting the stage, what others have said openly about injury caused by EMR field effects. There is relatively comprehensive literature on reported deleterious effects from exposure at close ranges to perceived anomalous aircraft of apparent advanced design. Some of the claimed physiological effects include such phenomena as paralysis, electrical shocks, feeling of heat, burns, perception of odors, etc. Whether such effects are the result of unintended or intended harm to humans is yet to be determined, though evidence for the latter can be inferred in certain cases. We will draw on that literature for selected cases, where exposure and emitter data are known or can be inferred, or where injury can be logically related to biophysical parameters. That is, it is of particular interest in a threat analysis program, regardless of whether anomalous craft-induced physiological effects of humans are intended or not, to ascertain probable mechanisms, field strength, etc., involved in the generation of the reported physiological effects. It is our contention that characteristics of the fields or mechanisms associated with close encounters with anomalous craft can even sometimes carefully be gleaned from archival records where effects on human physiology have been carefully reported. This is true because the medical literature of such field effects, although not many related to craft, has been mature for decades, and is rich in peer-reviewed medical reports and papers. There are several professional societies within the Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS, National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, NSF/NIH, domains, including the Centers of Disease Control Epidemiology Intelligence Service, EIS, that follow these effects, and numerous examples will be discussed. B. Newly unclassified material. A couple of years ago a citizen, who believed he was being targeted by the United States government with harassing field effect weapons, edits and highlights below, are the authors. 20 walked into an FBI field office with a 2-page letter signed by him and addressed to Special Agent Yaya of the United States Secret Service. His letter stated, in part, "Agents of the U.S. Secret Service, as you already know, have been committing very serious crimes against me and other members of my family for a very long time, and I'm taking more direct action to prevent it from continuing. I am going to get an admissible confession from at least one of your agents one way or the other, and if I don't get what I am demanding from you today, I will use the method of torture described in the attached pages to obtain that confession and to punish the agent for his or her involvement in the illegal acts that your agents have been perpetrating against me and my family." After he was arrested, the court found the evidence for the alleged electromagnetic assaults unconvincing. The district court then held a competency hearing at which testified, inter alia, that the back of a pair of his shoes were vaporized by an electromagnetic weapon fired at his feet in 2001. Presented the shoes in question to the district court, but it appeared to the court that the heel of the shoe had simply worn out due to ordinary use. Inevitably, 20's mental status was questioned. After receiving this report, 20 requested that he be examined by a medical professional of his own choosing. The psychologist chosen by 20 concurred with the government psychiatrist that 20 is clearly psychotic and precisely fits the diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. The story didn't end then. It turned out that 20 Ma